Welcome to Bamadziji Ginonindwa. This podcast is produced by the Communications Department at the Anishinaabeg Nation. We will be focusing on the issues and initiatives in Anishinaabeg Nation territory. I'm your host, Lisa Abel. This podcast is the second of a 4-part series exploring Two-Spirit-themed topics that we've created in collaboration with members of the Anishinaabeg Nation's Two-Spirit, Two-Heart Indigenous Queer Nation Advisory Council. In our first episode about Two-Spirit terminology, Nawaka Gishimigwan and Aaron Bowerman talked about the ongoing decolonization work to reclaim and use the words for Two-Spirit people that are already embedded in Anishinaabe language and ceremony. In this episode, we will hear part of the conversation I had with Nawaka and Aaron about their understandings of Two-Spirit histories and how Two-Spirit people traditionally had highly respected community roles and responsibilities. However, colonization and outside religions disrupted our Indigenous ways of life over many generations. In some regions, harmful homophobic influences are still present, though there are Anishinaabe who held on to our original teachings. Today, Two-Spirit people are reclaiming their rightful place within our communities and are offering intergenerational support to other vulnerable Two-Spirit people who are looking to reconnect to Anishinaabe ceremony and community. Nawaka Gishimigwan, Longfeather, also known as Lyndon George, is a member of the Chippewas of Kettle and Stony Point First Nation. They live in Hamilton in the Dish with One Spoon Treaty Territory. Nawaka Gishimigwan is an Anishinaabe Ojokwe, a Two-Spirit term which translates as wise woman. Nawaka Gishimigwan currently works in the justice field and has worked with Indigenous people all of their life, both on and off reserve. Aaron Bowerman identifies as an Anishinaabe Two-Spirit man, born and raised in Shigwinda First Nation on Manitoulin Island. Aaron is an Indigenous Research Associate with the City of Toronto and is passionate about harm reduction, 2S LGBTQIA+ issues, HIV/AIDS, and social determinants of health within Indigenous communities. Is this a good place to segue then into this idea of talking about Two-Spirit history? Because this idea of gendering terms and different words are saying they're imposed by colonization. So is now a good time to go back and talk about Two-Spirit history?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and Aaron certainly did lay down the groundwork for the historical context of who we are as Two-Spirit, Indigenous queer, Two-Heart people. And I think, as I had mentioned earlier, one of the first things that we need to be mindful of is that our terms that help identify our gender and gender identities are ancient terms that have been around for thousands of years. And that with those terms and with those identities come very specific roles and responsibilities. Under our governance systems, each of us are born with roles and responsibilities, and Two-Spirit, Indigenous queer, Two-Hearted people are no exception to that. We have our roles and responsibilities too. But one of the things that I think that is very important, that has also been important to me along my journey, are the words that were shared by Honorable Murray Sinclair Baugh, who has just started his journey today. He had mentioned very specifically Two-Spirit people, and he had talked about his life in ceremony as part of, I believe, Medewan society, and talked about lodge and talked about roles and responsibilities. And one of the most important things that Murray Sinclair could have ever shared with the universe is that Two-Spirit, Indigenous queer, Two-Heart people have always had very specific roles and responsibilities within our community. And those roles and responsibilities were always held in high regard with high respect. And that's our history. He also talked about it had always been believed that when Two-Spirit, Indigenous queer, Two-Heart people would conduct ceremony or even be present during ceremony, that it was much more spiritually heightened.
When my daughter spoke to us as a young teenager of her recognition of who she was, we stood beside her and gave her every assurance of our love and of her right to be open about what she was. We told her about the fact that among Indigenous people, being a two-spirit was traditionally a position of respect and honor. Ceremonies, we have been taught, are enhanced if done by or with two-spirit people present, for it is believed that they embody the strengths and spirits of both man and woman and bring a special healing power and medicine to every special event. She has brought great respect to our family. We are said to be blessed by having her as our daughter because she is two-spirit, and we feel so.
It's important to mention that Murray Sinclair Baugh spoke these words in the Senate of Canada on June 13, 2016, as part of a larger statement acknowledging the victims of a tragic mass shooting at a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, the night before. 49 people died, and 53 more were wounded. At the time, the attack was the deadliest mass shooting by a single shooter in United States history, and was also the deadliest incident of violence against lesbian, gay, and bisexual people in the history of the United States. Murray Sinclair Baugh also shared the fear that parents of two-spirit children may feel, knowing that they're at enhanced risk of danger by being gay or transgendered, as Indigenous people, or being female.
That was a very important time hearing Murray speak those words, because the conversations that we as Indigenous people have been having for hundreds of years around our fires, around our kitchen tables, around our dining room tables in our living rooms, and nobody wanted to believe anything we had to say. And Murray Sinclair was that messenger of all of those conversations. So when he spoke those words about two-spirit, Indigenous queer, two-hearted people, it meant something for many people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, because Murray was honored, Murray was educated, Murray had the space afforded to him where people believed his truth. And the truth that he was bringing forward was the truth of two-spirit, Indigenous queer, and Indigenous two-hearted people. And that's what I think was so important about what he had to contribute. But I think that's important that we acknowledge that part of history, and that's who we are and where we come from, and that, again, we are part of those ancient societies. We do know that we had very specific roles and responsibilities. One of the ones that really, when I think about it, it humbles me to this extent that I can't even explain. And that is the role and responsibility that members of our families and our communities and our nations would come to two-hearted, two-spirit, Indigenous queer folks and ask us to name their children. To me, that is one of the most honorable roles and responsibilities that anybody could be given. But to have somebody come to Queer Linden, have somebody come to two-hearted Nawaka Gizi Miigwech and say, please find a name for our son or our daughter that would stay with them for the rest of eternity. There's something extremely humbling about that for me. And that's just one of the many roles and responsibilities that we've had. We know that women in our communities were also very strong warriors. And they went off to fight in war, and they often presented male gendered, and that we have had many recorded male gendered, female presenting individuals in our communities, the most famous, of course, being Wiwa, and then, of course, Ishtosh, who had very specific roles and responsibilities within our nations that are very important to helping people better understand who we are and our importance within our nation. So historically, we have had all of those things. And I think that I believe that we just need to be mindful of the fact that when trauma came, when harm came from colonizers over the Big Creek, they brought their values, beliefs, and morals with them. And at that time, when they started coming over here, we have to be mindful of what those values, beliefs, and morals were. And one of the most significant one was that women had no voice and no power. So, of course, when they come over here to Turtle Island and they see that we have all these strong-willed, empowered female voices happening in our community and who have spaces of leadership, that's where the trauma comes from these settlers and these foreigners pushing their violence onto our women, and then of course pushing their homophobia and their values around um, homosexuality and two-spirit people on our communities. Many of us who have worked in the murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, trans identifying two-spirit uh, journey to push for the inquiry, we often educate folks that the very first point of violence against Indigenous women, girls, trans identifying two-spirit people was that first contact when the Spanish came here to the southernmost part of Turtle Island.
So that's over 500 years.
Over 500 years ago that violence has been happening against who we are. And we're just seeing it's just a system that keeps perpetuating. And, I remember years ago sitting in Aaron and I met through our very good friend, Tony Novasba. He's the one who introduced us years ago. And I remember sitting in those circles with those wise two-spirit ones many years ago. And we were talking about that we will see the reclamation of two-spirit roles and responsibilities, and we're starting to see that now. And once two-spirit roles and responsibilities are reclaimed, then we're going to see a more massive healing of our communities, because once more two-spirit, Indigenous, queer, two-hearted, Indigenous queer folks are going to be reclaiming our spaces within our ceremonies and within our communities. So that's when our communities are going to really become stronger again, that everybody has been welcomed back into that circle.
Aaron, in your journeys, have you heard any of these teachings or stories about the role of two-spirit people before colonization, two-spirit roles in our communities?
Yeah. I the same with Lyndon. Like I've heard, that in the past that we were held in high regard a lot of the times of like medicine people. Ones that always stood out for me were like mediators. And I think that's something it was almost taking on different being able to take on the different gender roles. They were able to help men and women who were in relationships kind of figure out some of their issues, but then also matchmakers. But I also think, for me, it's more about the roles that that two-spirit people are taking on today, right? I think like, specifically, I think about a time that Lyndon helped me when my cousin, who was a trans two-spirit woman, had passed in Hamilton, and I needed someone to help her spirit move on from that place where she passed on. And, the first person I called was Lyndon. I said, I don't know what to do. I need your help. We got to do something for her. And, Lyndon was that person that took on that role of, helping her spirit, move on and not stay in that house, and to send her home. So I think, and I see that a lot. I knew a lot about the history and the roles that we played, but I see it today. There's many of my friends, many of the people in my circle, they're doing this work already, supporting people who are not in a great place right now, people who need that healing, people who need to be welcomed into the circle, even though they may have issues that people think are preventing them from joining those circles. They're the ones that need that support and healing the most. And I think Two-Spirit people are really taking on that role of ensuring that the people who are needing that help and healing the most are able to get it. And I think, yeah, a lot of people I work with identify as Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer, and I think are really pushing to ensure that the people who are most vulnerable are getting the help that they need. Yeah.
I like the idea, though. You both mentioned how you managed to find in your circles Two-Spirit elders who were able to mentor you. They're bringing their experiences that their generations and the generations before experienced, and they're kind of helping to bring forward and share their knowledge and help with this reclamation work as well.
Yeah, it's so important to be able to find those spaces and those individuals in our circles and in our communities and in our nations of people who are aware of homophobia but have not allowed homophobia to shroud their worldview, or in particular shroud our worldview of who we are and the work that we need to do. I was just reflecting on the first time I heard of Two-Spirit. So my mom had gone to residential school, and while she was in residential school, she had learned Judeo-Christianity. And one of the things that she had learned is that she had a responsibility, if she was going to be a mother, to have to make sure that her children go to church. Otherwise, our souls would be damned and go to hell, shall Hades, and all that kind of stuff. So we, as children, um, my mom and dad had negotiated that my dad would agree to us going to church, which incidentally was an hour and a half away from our community. We were taken by a bus into the United States to go to church. Anyway, my dad had negotiated, well, that's okay. If you want the kids to go to church, let that be so. However, I will continue to teach them about who we are as Indigenous people, because my dad and his family, they never went to residential school, and so they didn't necessarily learn, were forced all those values. But my dad's side, they also had Christian values, but they maintained their Indigenous ways of life and ways of being. So this one particular day, I'm about 14 and a half, 15 years old. I already know that I'm queer. I already know I'm Anishinaabe Ojibwe. I already know what's going on. And so I'm sitting in this church at the back with my sister because we arrived late. And the minister, the pastor at that time, started talking about, if you identified, if you were a homosexual, or if you knew anybody who was a homosexual, that they were going to have to go to hell when they die, and they were going to burn in hell, and they were going to feel this everlasting pain from the fire burning them. And I sat there listening to this, already knowing that I am gay. And I turned to my sister and I said, what the hell am I doing here? And I got up and I left. And I went and sat in the car. So on the way home, my sister drove, and on the way home, it was a very quiet drive and very little conversation. Then when we got home, Sunday afternoons were always my time to go hang out with my dad in the garage, because he was always doing something on a motor or tinkering around in the garage. So on this particular day, he was under the hood of my mom's Cordoba. And that Cordoba had a great big hood then, that great big 70s Cordoba. And I'm just leaning in there watching him as he's working on the motor. And he says, what's wrong with you today? I said, nothing. And he says, "Oh no, there's something wrong with you. You're so quiet today. Normally you're just going on and on and on like I'm kind of doing right now." And I said, "No, nothing's up." And he said, "Hey, I know something's going on. So what is it?" So I told him, I said, "Well, at church today, the pastor said that people who are homosexuals are going to feel this everlasting pain and they're going to burn in hell feeling that pain." And my dad, as he was leaning across the front of the truck into the motor, looked at me with his Charlie Fox silver grayed hair and his silver rimmed sad eye glasses with the light blue tint. And he said, "That's not what our people believe. Our people believe in two-spirit people and they're respected and honored." And I didn't say anything else because I wasn't out of the closet. But that was the first time that I had heard about two-spirit people. But my dad knew about two-spirit people. And that's what was most important for me, is that he knew and he had heard of that history. So jump forward many years later, and after coming out of the closet and having family and parental support, I'm working in London, and I'm working with a group of two-spirit, indigenous queer, indigiqueer, two-hearted young people who have decided that they wanted to form a group because this was a massive number of indigenous queer folks, indigiqueer, two-spirit, two-heart people who have left their communities because of the heavy shroud of homophobia that brought violence into their lives. So everybody was running from our communities to be safe. But they also wanted to meet other two-spirit, indigenous queer, indigiqueer, two-hearted people. And so we created this group, and there was maybe around 30, 40 people at the beginning. Then it grew to about 50, 60 people, I guess. And as they were looking for a name, we were talking about shared experiences and how in our community sometimes some of us were called apples because we were red on the outside and white on the inside. So this group of very inquisitive and smart and creative two-spirit, indigenous, queer, two-hearted people decided that's going to be the name of our circle. It's going to be APPLE, and it's going to stand for Aboriginal People Promoting Love and Environments. And I thought that was so beautiful. Hearing the pain of all of these young kids and how they've been ostracized and many of them thrown out from their family homes, they had heard me talk about the support from my parents, my mom and dad, and they wanted to meet them. So I asked my mom and dad to travel into the city one Friday night, to come and meet with all these young folks. And gosh, heck, these young folks were just all over my mom and dad because they obviously felt that there was love. And so as my mom and dad started to talk about their story, walking the road with an indigenous queer, two-spirit, two-heart, indigiqueer person, they then extended their personal home phone number to all these young indigenous queer folks and said, "If you ever need a parent that you want to be able to talk to, you can call us." That was so important in terms of the support that we need, the loving environments that we need as two-spirit people that we often didn't get within our communities. Um, I know that there were acts of violence in my own community against two-spirit queer folks, but um, I at least had the support of my family, and that was really important.
That's a beautiful story. That's really significant. It's so intergenerational too, because you're saying that you received that support from your family, and then you were helping the next generation along, and then it created these intergenerational connections.
I think what was important for me is knowing that my dad had heard about it, because that's a whole generation before me. And so for me, that had instilled in my mind that yes, I do belong here, and that I am part of this nation and part of this community.
Did your parents or your dad ever share how they had received that teaching? Was it just a matter of fact in the community before?
It absolutely was, actually. It was just that Two-Spirit folks were different in a good way, and that we brought a different perspective into the circle, that we had very unique gifts and spiritual power. The spiritual power is what I remember the most, that he talked about the ability to be able to have that direct line to Creator and our ancestors that many others would not have, and that all of the different entities, spiritual entities that would be around us when we would either be in ceremony or facilitating ceremony. I also remember, I really don't mind sharing these stories. I also remember another really empowering time for me, because for me, it's so important now because of our history that's also been shrouded by homophobia, a construct that is not ours. It's so important that we show Two-Spirit, Two-Heart, Indigenous queer folks that love and that support. And it's really important that for me, that when I go out into these Indigenous circles, that I am without question visibly queer. That people can look at me and see, particularly, I'm talking specifically about our ceremonies known as powwow, because I think often we forget that powwows aren't just an event, they're ceremony. And when we go into those circles, it's important for Two-Spirit, Indigenous queer, Two-Hearted people to be visibly present. So when I go into those circles, I am very, very visibly Two-Heart, Two-Spirit, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe. No mistake about it, because our young people need to be able to see that there are others like you in our community, that there are other Two-Spirit people in our community, and that if we made it this far, you can make it this far. And I feel that's so important, because back home in my community, when I was a kid growing up, there was nobody like me until one day this gentleman in our community showed up with a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and a shawl. And he danced in the grand entry, the fancy shawl dance. And I could visibly see that that's me. That's somebody who's like me there when I was a young kid, like 5, 6, 7 years old. And I used to always be so excited to go to our powwows then, to know that he would be there, because I never saw anybody else at other powwows. Because when we were kids, my parent took us on a powwow highway. I never saw anybody else except him at our powwow. So now when I go to powwows, I'm very visibly queer. And because I think about, there's some 5-year-old or 6-year-old or 7-year-old out there looking for somebody in Grand Entry who's like them. And that's so important for me.
Did you ever end up getting to meet this man
Yeah.
as your role model?
Yeah, well, actually, he was my eldest brother's best friend. Yeah, and so they grew up together, and he was just such a. I just remember that he did so many important things in the world. The other thing that I know, I had talked with a very good friend of mine, Terry Sandsbaugh, who was Indigenous queer, who actually identified as Two-Spirit. He was from Walpole Island. And he and I had talked about all of the people that we knew from our communities, Anishinaabe communities, who were Two-Spirit, and how each one of us professionally were able to do professional jobs that were helping us to fulfill our traditional roles and responsibilities. So one of those traditional roles and responsibilities that Two-Spirit people have as well is the ability to bring people together. And that's often what we are asked to do without even knowing that we're fulfilling that role or that responsibility. We're asked to, can you bring the family together? Can you call everybody? Can you bring people to a wedding? Can you bring people to a funeral? Can you do all these things within our communities that were actually well aligned with our traditional roles and responsibilities. And another one that Aaron had mentioned is that the mediation work that we do as two-spirit people, we're often the ones who are called upon to sit in those circles and listen to the harm done from both sides. And we then facilitate those roles as mediation roles that traditionally were our roles and responsibilities. So many of us fulfilling our roles and responsibilities professionally that are bestowed upon us at birth as two-spirit. So that's always very nice as well.
I forgot where we started from on that.
We were talking about the history of two-spirit people. And the reason I talked about the significance with my dad saying that he had heard that is because it shows the generations of within our communities of people who have heard and about two-spirit and our roles and responsibilities, and that we were respected and honored in our communities.
Okay. Well, then, I wanted to ask Aaron the same thing. Do you have a context of how you learned about any two-spirit teachings on the reserve, or if there was even any kind of environment where there were other two-spirit people present or involved?
So no, I don't think I learned too much about two-spirit living on reserve. It wasn't talked about a lot, but I think for me, someone that really inspired me was my late cousin Kristen Baugh, the person I mentioned earlier that she she was trans, and she never said that she was trans. She never said that she was two-spirit, but it was obvious. And I think her, you know, bravery, unfortunately, it was brave, that she did have to be brave to be who she was. I think she always inspired me, and I know she said one day she had asked her dad about it, that if it was that she was different and if it was all right. And she said that was the only person in her life that she needed that recognition from. And so she was who she was, and she never spoke about it openly until later in her life, but she didn't feel the need to. And I think she was younger than me, but she was always someone who inspired me. And I don't think I realized that until much later in our lives. But I did, before she passed, I did mention that several times to her, that, you were always an inspiration for me, being such a young Indigenous two-spirit person. And yeah, she was, I think, a role model for me being younger, but I never got to hear about two-spirit people. I didn't have any role models per se, but she was someone who always inspired me. I don't think it was until I moved to Toronto and I started traveling a bit more where I realized there was other people that were like me. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess and there must be a difference between growing up in a rural or remote area versus living in an urban environment.
Yeah, and I think like this also speaks to, what Lyndon was saying, the importance of, us two-spirit folks going into communities and talking about this, not just with two-spirit people as well, but with the entire community. We don't have a lot of role models. And I just think like having someone come into the community to talk about two-spiritness and sexuality, and it could be fun. It doesn't need to just be this we're talking at you about gender and sexual health, but I think we could make it really fun. And I think it would mean a lot, not just to two-spirit folks, but to all their peers as well, to their teachers, to the staff on reserve. I think, having people, two-spirit people come into communities and having conversations and having fun and letting people see that we're not different or we're not bad, I think it would make a lot of difference for folks, younger folks, maybe older folks as well. I mean, not everyone's out of the closet. Sorry, I hate that term, out of the closet, but it's kind of what we have at the moment. But I think it will inspire people to treat each other with kindness and not be judgmental of one's sexual identity or preference, gender identity. Yeah.
That's really important, Aaron, that you mentioned out of the closet. It reminds me of a couple years ago having done some work up north, and there was the elected chief and council of that day, of that term, who were there for the training. And we were talking specifically about two-spirit people and the history and roles and responsibilities. And after the training was done and everybody had filtered away, there was one woman left who had approached me afterwards, and she was in her mid 60s to early 70s, and had confided that she was two-spirit, closeted two-spirit, lived in the community with her partner, and everybody knew that they were two-spirited, and they seemed to be okay with it, and I use that term very loosely, as long as they did not ever talk about their relationship or did not ever show any signs of affection or being in a relationship in the community. And that really made me sad, because they were confined to the privacy of their homes and in those walls where others were not confined. So I'm not sure that I would have survived in a community where they would try to make me feel that I had to live completely closeted. I, if that were my community, I would want to flaunt it more. But Aaron's right. I have not met one two-spirit, indigenous queer, two-heart person who doesn't have an incredibly awesome, fun sense of humor, or who doesn't possess some crazy, elevated artistic skill, whether it's a skill to speak, dance, bead, sew, paint. Every two-spirit, indigenous, queer, two-heart person I know is extremely gifted.
So that's something that hopefully we want all of our communities to embrace, the gifts and talents we're all bringing into our communities. It seems a shame that there are some places where people can't express themselves freely.
It is, it really is. I'm the first one to admit beading is not my skill. It is not my gift. I tried it once, and once those beads fell on the table and went onto the floor, that's it. I never went back to it. It's too frustrating for me. And that's why to this day, I do not mind having to pay our gifted ones the money that they ask for. And in fact, I feel that they should be asking for more than what they actually are asking for in sharing that gift with us, that gift of beading. So I think that I just feel that we really need to be able to nurture all of those things. Traditionally, in our communities, when we reflect on child rearing practices, this reminds me of the story that my eldest brother told me when I was growing up and after I had come out of the closet. Is that he said we knew, we all knew, because of my family. There are 11 of us, and there's many years in between the youngest and the oldest. And so when I was young, the older ones were teenagers, And then when I was getting closer to 10 years old, they were off and getting married and having their own kids, right? So anyway, my eldest brother said to me when my eldest sister was present that we knew you were different. Something was different about you. Everything that you did was different. The way that you talked, the way that you moved, the way that you did things, it was different. You wanted to do the boy things, but you wanted to do the girl things. You weren't like all the other relatives growing up on the reserve. And traditionally, I used to work in child welfare for 11 years in both protection and prevention. So I was working in child welfare, and I had learned about traditional Anishinaabe child rearing practices. And of course, at the most Indigenous communities across Turtle Island, those child rearing practices included non-interference, meaning you never stopped your kids, you let them experience. However, that when it came to Two-Spirit, Indigenous queer, Indigiqueer, Two-Heart people, if there was the masculine and the feminine spirit that was already being displayed at a young age, it became the responsibility of the community, not just the family, because remember that child rearing practices traditionally were a community and a nation responsibility, right? So that's why we go to powwows and places like that, and you see our kids running around, because we all share that responsibility to make for the safety and well-being of that child. So we learned that with Two-Spirit people, it's community responsibility to nurture the masculine and the feminine. So at that very young age that my siblings and my parents had noticed that I was different and that the way that I was doing things was different, it became their responsibility to then nurture the masculine and the feminine, meaning teach me the masculine ceremonies, teach me the feminine ceremonies. So that's traditionally how child rearing Two-Spirit people would happen within our communities. I remember when I did come out to parents officially, I was actually pushed out of the closet by a nosy sister who went digging through my luggage and found a love letter from my boyfriend at the time and took it to my parents. So my parents said that. So I eventually had come out to my parents in that way. However, my father and I, after I had come out the closet, we went into a little town where in this little town they had a Canadian Tire. And my father knew everybody everywhere. And we were in this Canadian Tire, and he was on one aisle and I was on the next aisle over. And I knew that my father was friends with one of the mechanics in the garage who had come out to greet my dad in the aisle, and I just happened to be able to hear them in the next aisle over. And so this gentleman comes out and says to my dad, "Oh, Bob, I heard you got a gay son. I'm so sorry." And without seconds of thinking, my dad's response was, "Why are you sorry for me? My wife, Sylvia, and I, we're sorry for you and your wife because you will never get to walk the journey with somebody who is Two-Spirit. You will never get to walk this road with somebody who is gay. But we've been afforded the opportunity and we've been blessed with this." And that just gave me so much power when I heard my dad and his quick response to that. And I wish all Two-Spirit kids who have had their doors closed on them could feel that power that I felt at that moment in time. That was so empowering. That's all I got to say about that.
Chi-miigwech to Aaron and Nawaka for taking part in the podcast and for sharing the rich history of Two-Spirit people, as well as how important it is for Two-Spirit and Two-Hearted people to find the love and support to reconnect with community and ceremony. In the next podcast of this 4-part series, we'll be talking about homophobia, which can be devastating to a two-hearted person's physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. We'll learn how we can address homophobia through inclusive language, inclusive policies, and by supporting Two-Spirit youth. As mentioned, Nawaka and Aaron are members of the Anishinaabeg Nation's Two-Spirit, Two-Heart Indigenous Queer Nation Advisory Council. If you, or someone you know, is interested in learning about and supporting this important work, please contact the Anishinaabeg Nation's Special Projects Coordinator. Find the link in the podcast description. This episode includes the tracks Brothers by Wolf Saga and Chippewa Travelers, and Where the Road Meets the Sky by Justin DeLorme, licensed by Nagamo Publishing, and Immersed by Kevin MacLeod. Chimigwech for listening to this episode of Bamadza Jake Ganonindwa. Until next time, Bama P.